Look at that, our audience immediately hushed. What high levels of anticipation. Welcome back to the Australian Clean Energy Summit, our opening leaders panel. We've got a fantastic lineup of panellists here to really start to delve into some of the topics that we heard referenced earlier this morning. And of course, now throughout the next day and a half, we'll plunge even more deeply into those complex challenges, enormous opportunities, all of those things. But I'm joined on the stage this morning by a fantastic group of leaders of the clean energy industry here in Australia to explore all of those challenges and opportunities. There'll also be an opportunity for the audience to participate throughout the conversation. We're going to have a couple of polls throughout to get your input on some of the big questions facing the sector. And we'll use that to draw out some of the panel's reflections. I'll firstly introduce our panel. Their detailed CVs are available to you via the event app. I won't give them to you in any detail. I'm joined firstly by Ning Chen, who is the CEO of Goldwind Australia, who is of course the platinum partner for this event. Goldwind have been a leader in the clean energy industry in Australia, here for many years, deployed over 1.5 gigawatts of renewable energy, more of that underway. Ning, welcome to you. Angela Karl, it's been a regular contributor to this event over the years with a couple of different hats over that period. Angela is the Managing Director of HMC Capital, brings over 20 years investment and advisory experience within the energy and utilities sector. A lot of different names and acronyms of companies you've been involved in. QIC, probably most significantly, then a litany of energy and clean energy companies that have been at the forefront of the debate. So welcome to you, Angela. Rob Wheals is the CEO of Squadron Energy. Welcome to you, Rob. Obviously at the forefront of the clean energy transition. He started in that position in March this year, but before that was with ASX top 50 listed energy infrastructure business, APA Group, and has a long history in the energy sector. And now, of course, with Squadron, which has a commitment to launching 14 gigawatts of renewable energy projects by 2030. Now, there's a big target. Stephanie Unwin is the CEO of Horizon Power, leading a team of 560 plus energy professionals to deliver power to some of Western Australia's most remote and regional communities, operating 38 microgrids, delivering energy to 46,000 residences across 2.3 million square kilometres. That's a lot of ground to cover, isn't it? Welcome to you, Stephanie. Stephanie's actually had a long history in the energy sector and played a role across all sorts of organisations, including ARENA and the Energy Networks Association. So welcome to you, Stephanie. And last but not least, Damien Nix, who is the CEO of AGL Energy Limited, one of the oldest businesses, probably one of the oldest businesses in the country, is it? Certainly in the energy sector, second oldest business in the country. Damien's been with AGL for quite some time, since 2013, and no doubt through that period seen the complexities of the energy transition firsthand. Was appointed as Managing Director and CEO in January 2023, and before that had a long background and expertise across many different sectors. So welcome to you, Damien. Welcome to the panel. We've got plenty of time to really plunge into some of the big picture and some of the real challenges facing the sector. Let's get cracking, and we'll start really at the macro. Really, I guess Australia's place in the global energy transition, and there's a lot of dynamics at play here. I've recently come back from the United States, where we've got Inflation Reduction Act that's fundamentally changing the landscape. Got an election coming up in the US. If one or both of the candidates makes it alive to the election, you've got the UK and many, sorry, too soon, apologies for that. You've got the UK, many parts of the world really doubling down on clean energy, all of that changing the global energy landscape quite significantly. Really throw it out to the panel. How do we make sense of all of that? What's happening globally, and what does it mean for us here in Australia? Who'd like to kick off?
I'm happy to kick off. I spend a lot of time focused on the global markets, and I think one of the key considerations is that it really is a fight for attracting capital into this country to help build what we need to build. There's $1 trillion of investment required in this country to decarbonise through to 2050. In the US, I just saw another report this morning, where that number's $10 trillion US for the same time horizon. So the way I like to think about this, and I talk to investors about this, is there's sort of 4 buckets. The first is money, and that's integrally linked to policy. So I think the progress that we've seen on the policy front in the last 18 months has been a huge positive for Australia, catching up with really accommodating policy that exists in both the US and in Europe in particular. A second key category that investors focus on is the actual physicality of the resources, and this is where Australia is a leader. We've got phenomenal renewable energy resources, and we've got a leading position in critical minerals, which is key to unlocking decarbonisation. And then it's about supply chains and people, and maybe it's a good point to pass to Ning on particularly supply chains and what's Australia's spot from a global position.
Well, thanks, Angela. I think, back to your, Ken's question, that what's happening globally, we are one of the global players, so we see lots going on there. But the feeling I've got here is we're not happening quick enough in Australia. So, as you mentioned, there are plenty investors are quite interested in the market. And we say, especially in some big North American investors are quite interested in Australia. So we say Australia is an attractive destination for investment in renewable. But the feeling I got is we need to be faster. So we need to be quicker. So what are the barriers actually stopping us to move as fast as we can? We all got an ambition that we want to be the renewable energy superpower, but how far we need to do to achieve that? I think that's probably the question for the guests here to discuss.
Great, thanks, Ning. We'll come back to a collection of those points. Rob, how do you view this?
Yeah, look, I think just in terms of Australia's position competing in the global markets, and Ning, you mentioned the question, or you raised the question of moving faster. One of the challenges is scale, and if you look at technological change and fighting for that technology to come to this country, fighting for talent to stay in this country, making sure that we make this an attractive place for capital to be invested. And just on the point of technological change, we've seen the technology really change so quickly over time. We look at batteries, which back in 2017, the Hornsdale battery in South Australia was phenomenal at the time. That's moved on. So one of the challenges for us in terms of moving faster, and it's a bit of a dilemma, is do you get in quickly at the forefront or risk being left behind in the change? Or if you get in too quickly, do you find that you actually get left with effectively technology that might be outdated? And you look at the rapid change in cost of solar and deployment and the technologies that are happening in that space, in the space where Squadron spends a lot of its time in wind assets. It wasn't so long ago where a wind turbine was 2 megawatts. It's now 4, 6, 7 plus. So I think there's that question of being able to embrace technology, but then bring it back to the point I was going to make about scale. I think, and hopefully I have my numbers right, but in 2023 in Australia we deployed 5, 6, 7 gigawatts of renewable energy, and it sounds like a big number if you add up everything across the board. And again, like I say, I hope my numbers are right, but if you look at what was deployed in China in the same period, it was more like 278 gigawatts. And so if you look at that sheer scale, your question around doing things faster, it can be done faster. It's about embracing that technology and then deploying it quickly, and I'm sure we'll get on to the discussion about what are some of the inhibitors for us moving fast enough.
Damien or Stephanie, the big global trends and factors, and how do they impact us here?
Yeah, something that I've got really interested in of late is the impact of AI, for example. And I know that maybe is a bit of a step adjacent to the clean energy transition and what we're talking about, but it's certainly driving, I think, very big demand. And what I find fascinating about that is that for some time we've been looking at low demand as a real problem, in our systems, and then having to shore that up with batteries and firming sort of services. And when we start to look at the numbers of data centres, for example, coming into Australia and the proliferation around major centres, you start to see something that's hugely opportunistic for people in the energy space, which is, fantastic, finally, in addition to EVs getting to where they've got to, there's a real kick up in demand. And I think about those as probably, the new smelters. They're like the new smelters in our horizon. Are we really geared up for those is a big question. And if you look at the investment that Telstra is putting into intercity fibre, again, it looks like to me there's a real step change there. So that's enormously exciting. But when we talk about then the inhibitors to capitalising on that enormous excitement, if I move now to say the Pilbara, we've got all of these trade-exposed industries in the Pilbara, and one of the most energy or carbon-emitting jurisdictions or industrial centres. And how that area finds a way to decarbonise is a huge problem, particularly because we need to do that at scale and at pace. And at the moment, the settings are a little bit opaque, as in who is going to say yes to the enormous amount of transmission that needs to be built to do this in a way that gives investment certainty to those industries that then need to say, okay, I'm going to buy some of that green energy. And then where is that green energy coming from? So in the Pilbara, we do not have a RES. We don't have anything that is designated as a renewable energy zone. So the setting that says, great, this thing's coming, it's going to come into this location, and I just have to build from A to B, that's not there. It's very much proponent-led. And without someone saying, look, I'm kind of been there, I'm there for the backstop. I'm there, which is normally the role of the state, to say, I'm going to be there for the gap between the bold ambition and the efficient use of capital. I think that's what's driving some of the delays in, getting to yes. And I haven't, I guess, begun to touch on the trust that you need from the community to do that, and where trade-offs have to be made against, for example, biodiversity and traditional owner concerns. And then, how do you get to yes through that minefield is, again, really, really challenging for us. But again, enormously exciting if we can unlock it's here but not here. And we're going hard in this direction, and it's for this purpose. I think we can really make some mileage.
Yeah, and maybe, excuse me, picking up on the comments there, I think the opportunity is incredibly exciting. The opportunity is huge. There's certainly not a lack of capital out there. I think the capital exists. It's for all of us to make sure we can deploy this capital. We can work through some of the challenges. We talked about supply chain. I do think they'll start to unwind themselves in time. I mean, the demand is out there. They'll start to unwind. In terms of comments around technology, whether you invest now or you invest later, you want to make sure you have breadth of technology through this. And you heard that through Daniel's comments as well. We need a breadth of technologies through this energy transition. It's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be multiple. So for us, it's about finding the right option that's right to execute on now, and then continuing to build out that portfolio as you execute around the rest of it. Ultimately, why are we doing this? We're doing this for our customers. So again, we need that flexibility to be able to go as quickly as we can when the customers need it.
At past summits, there's been a lot of discussion about Australia's opportunity to become a global clean energy superpower. We're going to talk a fair bit about some of the challenges here and now. We're at 40%, we're heading to 80%. We've got a lot to do to get there. What does that mean, and what do those challenges tell us about that bigger macro opportunity? I'm actually going to bring the audience in here before I hear from the panel on that. Angela's dying to jump in. I'm going to throw to the audience on this one. We're going to use the Slido app. So now's the time to get your mobile phones out. Make sure they're on silent, please. Jump on to slido.com. I think there's instructions up here. Oh, there we go. There's actually, jump onto slido.com. Hashtag ACES24 or use the barcode It's not a barcode. What is it? What's the QR code? Sorry, I feel very old saying that, don't I? The QR code. Thank you to the young hipsters on the stage for correcting me on the QR code. Jump online and put in your opinion on this. Will Australia become a global clean energy superpower? Yes is streaming through. There you go, Angela. What do you think? No's up to 40. Here comes no. Angela, save us.
It's
Australia
hard
become
given
a
there's
global
a
clean
live
energy
survey
superpower? Yes,
behind
no.
me. Well, I would say we absolutely should. And there's probably 3 key factors that drive my conviction on that. The first is, as I referenced before, just on the physicality of it, Australia is a leader for renewable energy. So we've got 400 times the amount of renewable energy that we need hitting our shore every day, and that compares to 50 to 100 times in Southeast Asia, 50 to 100 times in the US, and less than 50 times in Europe. And we've also got an incredibly low population density, so we've got a lot of land mass to harness it. Equally, with critical minerals, I think we're a top 5 reserve owner of 16 of the 26 Quad designated critical minerals, so we should have a truly strong position to harness all of those renewable resources and export them. The second key opportunity for this country, which we're starting to see some policy changes on, and I think it's really encouraging, is how do we move up the value chain of harnessing those renewable energy resources, whether they're geologically based or from the stratosphere through wind and solar? What are the component parts of that supply chain that Australia can onshore some manufacturing capability so that we've got higher value add? And then the final thing, and I'll just pick up on Steph's comments because I think this is a fascinating dynamic, is the rise of AI and the energy demand that's coming out of large language computer systems. An interesting point about these systems is that you don't actually need the fibre connection to be closely located to the usage of the data. You actually need the data centres to be closely located to the renewable energy. And then you look at what the large language requirements for the Asia-Pacific region should be, and that's a huge opportunity for this country.
You've obviously made some very compelling points because the poll is firmed up to yes, so up to 58%. I feel like if we gave you another half an hour, we'd get well over 60 on the yeses. But Rob, I mean, how do you see this superpower opportunity unfolding?
Yeah, well, I might just look at the scores I'm talking and see whether I can influence it one way or another. But look, I agree with everything Angela said around the opportunity we have, blessed with all the natural resources. But I do feel that as a country we are at a crossroads now. And why I say that is, if you look ahead and you look at the amount of renewable energy that we need to deploy through to 2050 to achieve our net zero, that on a straight line basis looks achievable. But we all know that heavy lifting has to happen over this next decade to achieve what needs to be achieved, not just purely from an emissions perspective, but because the very fact that we've got old coal plants that are retiring and they need to be replaced. So coming back to my point about a crossroads, we just can't afford to have this distraction with political debate. We can't afford to have, if you want to term it, the climate wars and relitigating what's already been determined as the least cost, most affordable path forward to replace our energy system. And back to our point about global competitiveness, our peer countries, the other OECD countries, they're not relitigating all this, they're just getting on with it. And so should we. Final point I want to make is that, yes, the big opportunity clearly is to decarbonise our energy system and therefore our economy. But we shouldn't also forget the enormous economic opportunity for the economy as a whole, but specifically for regional areas. And that's probably another discussion all on its own, but there's a real opportunity for our regional areas to benefit from the deployment of this industry. That's why I come back to the point. If we delay, if we hit the pause button, we're at that juncture, and I'm not sure what the poll's saying now, but hopefully I've talked us up to saying, Rob, yes, we should get the move on.
This has now become a barometer of your respective performance on stage. It's like the worm.
Let me see if I can move it for you, Rob. Let me see if I can move that along.
Which way do you want to move it, though?
Look, I think, hopefully positively. I think when you think about the customer in this, the customer is a big driver of what's happening through this market. We've seen it solar on rooftops, we're seeing batteries and EVs. Having such a big play of the customer through this, I think that can also help us be that superpower we need to. The penetration we see here in Australia compared to the rest of the world is huge. So again, that is a big part of how we can help move this through the customer because, again, about a third of our customers have solar on their roofs, and about 40% have meters on smart meters on their walls now. But there's huge amount of opportunity there, and the customer is driving that. So that superpower piece can be really led by the customer as well.
I think that is such a great call. And if you add to that the EVs, which I know that you guys are interested in, as are we, when you think about a vehicle having something like 4 days in its battery that it can then power back into the house. So a house draws, say, 20 kilowatts a day, an EV has about 100. You also then, as a customer, can really step into this space of having reliability. Now, with that, we need to make sure that the house can actually draw from the car, that you don't need to run around with an extension cord and plug it into your fridge. So it does need to kind of come in through the front door and address everything. But I think there's a huge opportunity in CER, so customer-led decarbonisation, and equally kind of at the other end around with all of this vast land that we have available to us, an amazing resource, it's actually the customer who's also saying, hey, you need to work with me so that when you do this big stuff, I also get to understand why and what the benefits are in it for me. And I think if we're really going to try and supercharge our ability to be a major player in this around the world, how do you take every community along with you and you try and overcome this idea of fear that this stuff is happening everywhere? If you can say instead, hey, it's here and this is why, and then this is what we get out of it, and it's a mutual benefit, I think we're going to make a lot of headway. And I know Squadron's doing amazing stuff in this space in terms of the community benefits that you're looking at sharing and how that's creating trust. I think it's pretty impressive.
Thanks, Steph. Did you want me to comment on that now?
Well, you're totally disrupting the flow of my questions, but go for it, Rob. No, this is a critically important topic, and why don't you go for it, Rob, and respond?
Well, just picking up on that, look, I think, as I get out and about and talk to people in the industry and also the interactions I've had so far with the community, and I read all the same stuff that we all read, it's fair to say that the feedback from community and the support for the industry is varied. It really depends with what their experience has been. And so I think that's a lesson for all of us in how we interact with community. What I would say is where we've seen best results is where that interaction has started a long time ago. There's building trust. It's not just about I'm arriving today and I want to build my project and sort of trying to get sort of a one-sided discussion happening. So that discussion needs to have started a very long time ago to build trust and to pick up on Steph's cue there. In the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone, where we've got a project, we don't yet, I say we've got a project, we don't yet have anything under construction, but the activity started a very long time ago, and I certainly can't take credit for it. The team have been busy at this for a very long time. But just to give you some insight into the sorts of things that the team have been doing, they've really just done some really deep listening with communities to what their issues are. And they're actually not necessarily related to the project itself. For example, lots of the landowners have issue with internet connectivity and mobility on their properties. So we're coming up with solutions that actually does a mesh infill on their property so that they've got better connectivity, they've got ag tech solutions. So that's what they're saying is their issue. And we're starting that well before we're actually even constructing a project. Another example is an arrangement we've entered into with the Dubbo Regional Council. Our projects are going to consume a lot of water for dust suppression and concrete and other things during the construction activity. And so we're funding the development and construction of an advanced wastewater treatment plant, which will give us water for our project, but leave behind a legacy of water for the long term. So those are just some of the sorts of things that we can do we must all get better at. Do that deep listening, respond to community, and do that well ahead of when projects start, because that builds that social license. Because we know that when the real activity starts and lots of trucks are coming in and there's workers and accommodation and disruption, you've got to have done the hard yards well ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think it's become increasingly obvious that the point of maximum anxiety for those communities is between when the project is announced and when it's actually complete. Once it's complete, people, I think Stephanie, you made the point, they get to see it, they experience it, and actually they become quite comfortable with it. But it's in that void, if you like, in the middle, and that's where that, I think clearly that deep consultation, engagement, and being very proactive, I think is critically important. Can I, we'll come back to bits of all of that conversation in a little bit, but can I let's take us to policy. And, I made the point this morning about the federal government and the steps they've taken in 2 years. It's pretty well 2 years since the federal government stepped in. The many steps they've taken, I think Assistant Minister McAllister stopped short of walking through all of their achievements, but they're many, and I think they've been focused broadly in the right areas. Can I maybe get a bit of an assessment and a scorecard? How's the government doing from a policy perspective? What are the missing pieces? We'll come back in a second and get your perspectives on the capacity investment scheme quite specifically, but have we got the policy landscape that we've been looking for?
Why don't I take that one? So, look, I think what we have now is policy in front of us, which is great. I think what we need for this market, and picking up on Rob's comments, is policy certainty. The uncertainty in this market, which will ultimately create concerns for all of us. We're making multi-billion-dollar investments over the coming years. We need the policy certainty so we can get on with it. These assets are going to be in place for 10 to 20 years, so the policy certainty is incredibly important. I think what we have in front of us right now is good ambition, good policy. What we need now is that real certainty, because, as I said, like $8 to $10 billion is what we're going to spend over the next 10 years to replace our thermal assets. That is significant. And so if you're going to do that properly, you want to make sure when you make the FID on those assets that you have real certainty, that you're confident you'll get a return on those assets, but they also play an important role in the market for our customers too.
I'm dying to ask you about nuclear now, but I won't. I'll come back to that. Angela?
I think that's a perfect summary, actually, Damien, because I agree. There's a clear trajectory and there's clear ambition, but there are still a lot of discrete additional policies that create a level of uncertainty that just makes it, at a minimum, more difficult to make investment decisions, but at worst more expensive to make those investment decisions because people need to price in the risk. And this isn't at all commentary that's just at the government in power. It's actually to all sides of politics. It is really critical for there to be some clarity, certainty and clear direction and alignment across all of the parties so that this country can get on and decarbonise. We should be able to do that actually quite easily given the great position we're in with regards to access to renewable energy, but also to seize this opportunity to export as a superpower. And one metric that is not commonly picked up on, but I think it's really important for people to bear in mind, whether we want to keep running coal or gas or not, it's about 12% of our GDP and the rest of the world is weaning itself off it. So what are we going to replace that with when we forecast the economics of this country 20 years out?
You heard it here first. Angela Karl calls for bipartisanship on energy policy. We'll come back to that shortly. Rob, capacity investment scheme quite specifically, sort of one of the final bits of the jigsaw puzzle. What's the assessment of the capacity investment scheme? Too early to tell, pointing in the right direction, let's get on with it? That's a polling question really, isn't it? But,
look, I think, so my perspective on this EIS is that it's a response to what is effectively a problem, which is market failure. We're needing market reform. We've got an energy-only market, but we need to drive in a whole bunch of capacity. We haven't had that market reform, and so this is a stopgap to encourage investment in, and it certainly has come a long way to removing investment uncertainty, because as we all know, if you're successful in getting a CIS, then you know what your minimum revenues are and you can make an investment decision. That said, so real positive in that sense, and I think it certainly is going to make a big difference. But we shouldn't forget the fact that it is an intervention in the market. And what it really effectively means is you've got a whole bunch of generators in the market receiving revenues that sit outside of the spot price of the market. And what does that effectively mean? It could mean that we're not getting the right investment signals for more investment to come in. And that's arisen because we've intervened in the market. The other thing, of course, is by doing this, we're forcing a whole bunch of more renewables into the market. It can increase market volatility. That leads to negative pricing, and that's not actually dealt with in the CIS as well. So those are two issues. I think the other aspect that we shouldn't forget is that when you're bidding in to win in the CIS process, if we're not careful, we could end up with low quality projects being bid in, which ultimately may never actually be constructed. And that was because they bid in at a low price and effectively, won that process. So we've got to be, there are some pitfalls in the CIS. Overall, I would give it a positive because it's sought to address one of the key issues, which is how do you give investment certainty, the point Damien was making. But ultimately, it's not the silver bullet. When you think about making big investment decisions, that having off-takers or certainty of revenue is one issue, but having access to grid is another. And CIS certainly doesn't solve that problem.
We'll come back to grid. Damien, how do you look at the CIS and equally that question of what happens next? I mean, the investments you're making over a 20, 30, 40-year lifetime, how do you see the market evolving post-CIS?
Yeah, look, similarly to Rob's questions, to comments, absolutely we see it as a positive to drive renewable generation into the market. We also have the view that we want to make sure it's the right products coming into the market as well, those right assets are coming in. You want them to be the most economic they possibly can be. That's obviously critical. So, again, we're looking at this very closely from our own pipeline. We've got 6 gigawatts in the pipeline as to which assets will play into that, which ones won't. Again, it's about making sure that you can execute on those particular assets ready to go. To Rob's comments that, it does provide a revenue floor in many respects, but we want to make sure it's the best projects that get up in this marketplace. So I think it's positive, absolutely, and I think it will drive the right direction that we need. In terms of where the market is by 2030, I think the 2030 market reform is therefore also incredibly critical we get on with to understand what that market's going to look like from 2030 onwards.
Energy ministers, state and federal, meet later this week actually in Melbourne, and I suspect we'll hear more about process and reform to the market post-2030. We need to hear that now, and that work needs to get cracking ASAP. Angela, I might come to you on CIS from an investability perspective. How do you view the CIS?
Well, I'd actually just echo the same comments. So on balance, a positive because we know we're behind with regards to the annual newly installed grid utility scale, grid-connected renewables we need to do each year. But there is a risk in the awarding of these and in the bidding on these that there are bids submitted and contracts awarded for projects that are not economical and that won't be built. So the government has created a situation where it will be picking winners, and I think the process and the criteria that goes into that is going to need to be very carefully thought through.
Sessions on that very topic later on today, including hearing from some of the officials at front and centre of that. Rob?
Thanks. I thought I'd just mention one other thing, and I caught the tail end of Damien Westerman's speech talking about the importance of gas generation to firm up renewables, and we should really see gas generation step in for those moments when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Just in the context of the CIS, obviously gas generation is excluded, and if you read the latest ISP, it's calling for a whole bunch of gas generation to be constructed. So, the question that I have in the design of the CIS is if you're trying to encourage more renewables in, you can have a CIS for renewables, you can have one for batteries, but one of the ingredients for encouraging more renewables into that market is excluded.
We'll come back and talk a bit more about gas shortly. I might, Stephanie, You operate largely in Western Australia, which is a different energy market. You've already got a capacity thing there. You've also got gas reservation. How do you think about, when you think about the NEM more widely, how do you think about what the future of the market looks like? Are we going to return to a market? Are we sort of going to have to live forever after with forms of intervention to drive various investments and ensure the thing hangs together? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, WA's had or the Swiss, so the south part of WA, has had a reserve capacity mechanism for as long as I can remember. And it's operated reasonably well at bringing in the generation that's needed. Equally, it was before, I guess, the demonisation of gas. And so gas was never excluded from it. And there's certainly pretty strong liquidated damages that attach to not being there at the time that you promised that you were meant to have your generation in the market. And then WA, as a result, for a long period of time, has had a fairly stable portfolio of coal, gas and renewables coming in. I think what's going to get really interesting with the retirement of coal is how you then deal with storage. We don't have a snowy hydro, we don't have the topography that I think is particularly well suited to pumped hydro. And the need to have, multi-day storage is something that needs to be thought through. I guess then if I take myself to the Pilbara, there really is no market there at all. So in the Pilbara, it's very much a matter of bilateral trading and very light-handed regulation that's looked after, in effect, by the three transmission providers, which is ourselves, what is now APA and Rio. Up there, I think it's fascinating. I feel like we need a SIS to call for transmission and a SIS to call for storage. That, I think, would be enormously helpful in that marketplace. But on your question about will we keep seeing intervention, well, wherever there's fear and anxiety of blackouts or brownouts, yeah, you're going to see intervention. And I think what we're seeing is across Australia, a stronger and stronger stance taken by each state government on intervening and having control over its own destiny. So I think probably going to see more and more of it. Had we at some point just kept carbon pricing, we might all be in a really different position right now because it seems to have been reasonably effective in other jurisdictions.
Stephanie Unwin calls for a national carbon price. Got that headline, as Giles Parkinson's up there, already written, I'd suspect. You didn't say that. Sorry, I should be clear, you didn't say
I'm
that.
happy to say that.
Right, okay, good. I say it all the time. Angela, how do investors make sense of this? It's a complex investment environment. There's a lot of moving pieces. What do we see? What does that mean for deal structures, investment, debt, equity? How does all this come together? We need, as we've discussed, 6 and 7 gigawatts of large-scale generation a year on top of the 3 gigawatts of small. That's a lot of capital, a lot of debt, a lot of equity. How do we make that happen in this complex environment?
Yeah, so it's the right place to start, which is to look at what exactly do we need to finance, because it's quite different to what we were previously financing. So if you rewind the clock 5 to 10 years ago, when we were seeking large-scale institutional investment into the energy sector, a lot of the assets were very heavily contracted, and almost all of the risk sat with either the off-taker or the OEM or the OMA provider. That is not the case these days, and so from an investor's perspective, an institutional investor's perspective, the capital that is being sought for this transition is perceived as riskier because we're moving into a period of higher volatility due to the energy transition. The investment is required to come in at an earlier stage, so development stage or construction stage. Connection risk, I know we'll come to talk about that shortly, but that's got its own bucket of risk premia attached to it. So it is riskier and it is being perceived as such. But again, the key to all of this is to be able to ensure two things. The first is to provide as much clarity on what that long-term outlook is, because these are 20, 30, 40-year assets that we're asking people to invest in. And the second is just to ensure that we've got the policy settings right to support that.
Ning, Goldwind is both a supplier of technology but also a leading developer in Australia. How do you, the structure of your projects, the way they're financed, how is that evolving for you in the context of these challenges?
Sure. So as same as any investors in this room, so we always keep our close eye on the policy. So this is what we got, and I believe this is going to work. And we just started, and we have an opportunity to improve. If there is a problem, we can say in the future. I guess in terms of financing, this larger scale project, they definitely need a financing arrangement in place, and so the banks and financiers, they all needed to have these key elements of the policy plays a role. The key difference I realize in the recent years is the plenty of project finance, in the individual project basis in the past, but at the moment, the market actually prefer, the banks, they more prefer portfolio finance, which are larger scale projects as a group to manage the risk on project individually. I think that's probably the key difference compared to probably a decade ago. I think that's continually to be the key feature, especially we've seen large scale development projects in wind, solar, or dispatchable batteries. Those projects are normally developed individually, but later on, once it's being constructed, built, it's going to be forming part of the large group or portfolio.
Great. There's a session on finance straight after lunch, so we'll plough much more deeply into those issues then. Maybe to Stephanie and Damien, I mean, a lot of focus and discussion here about government policy, the role of the SIS to bring through new projects, but the role of customers. I mean, if you're a big energy customer, you must look at these same challenges with a sense of nervousness. And I mean, what do you see as the role of big customers to really lean into underwriting, contracting, direct investing, supporting new deployment?
Do you want me to go first? Look, I love the role of the customer in I guess, this whole debate, because I often feel like we spend a lot of time at the very large transmission scale and the very large, we need 7 times this and la la la. And I do sometimes feel that we haven't first tapped into what is already there. And I look at what is already there across the rooftops, particularly very large commercial rooftops across Australia, and I'm often really surprised at how little I see that is sitting kind of behind the meter, and how quickly, with both efficiency, probably with smart design, and we were, I think, both able to hear, there's this really great guy out of the Rocky Mountain Institute, Amory Lovin, who, I think he's a rock star in this space, who has just said, goodness me, everything you guys design is wrong. You need to have fat, like piping, no corners, and you've got to move everything up to the same level so you don't have to go around corners and waste energy. But imagine if you then design things properly, but let's say we will never do that. Let's just start with, there are so many rooftops that we have yet to take advantage of. And if we can aggregate that and then control to some degree, with a benefit back to the customer, the use of that rooftop, I think we unlock some really exciting opportunities for Australia. And if you then start to create the products where you can firm that up, and then maybe you add a fleet of vehicles, for example, you do create a power station in the home or in your large-scale customers' premises. If you take that to the big extreme of, the FMGs and the BHPs and the Rios, that electrification play is quite enormous, and a huge amount can be done, in proximate to mine or proximate to house or proximate to, commercial venture, that may mean that we don't need as much of the bigger stuff. So I think it's vital that you start with customer-leading decarbonisation, and then you get back a whole lot of the trust and the social licence that I think a lot of us are struggling with when we go straight to greenfields. Because if you're already in there, you're already doing it, you're much more inclined to say, and therefore I'm happy to support this bit of extra stuff that we need to fill in the gaps. So I do think that is, I know we're starting to tap into it, I do think it's a huge opportunity. And I'm looking at every rooftop pub in remote and regional WA, because those pubs really struggle, right? You have less and less people living regionally. If you were given just a simple rebate for me to have your rooftop, I reckon it's a winner. So I've tasked my team every pub in regional WA, we want their rooftop.
Is it stopping at every pub on the way?
Well, you do that too, Damien.
There's a job.
And I should tell you a funny story. I was on a zero alcohol. It's dry July, everyone. The worst month of the year for me. And I did pop into the Marble Bar pub, which is a pretty exciting pub if you've ever been. They're a little scary. They do stare at you if you're a female.
The Ironclad, I've
Yeah.
been there. Yep.
It's pretty amazing.
Hottest pub in the country or the world, isn't
kind
it?
of worth going to because it's quite iconic. But I did ask for a zero alcohol beer, and I can say that that's not something I'll ask for again. Over to you.
Damien, I mean, we heard Daniel. I don't know how I steer us out of this one. We heard Daniel this morning talk about the importance of orchestration. One thing's to have nearly 4 million homes with rooftop solar, but how do we, in particular as we're seeing the rise of home batteries, electric vehicles, etc., how do we orchestrate, and how important is that?
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree with Stephanie's comments, not about the pubs per se, but more about what we need to do with the customer, because that will drive everything that we need to do, and it will actually reduce the amount that needs to be built in this market. I absolutely agree with that. I think the orchestration piece, though, is going to be driven by technology. Technology will have to drive this. We have to make it simple for our customers. We have to make it easy for our customers. You might get some out there that really like to play the market, but generally we see from our customer base, they want it simple and they want it easy. So we're doing a huge amount of work with, not only shifting whether it be hot water loads around the market or we're, virtual power plants with our customers, but as part of that, it's sharing the value with them. So if we're drawing on their batteries, we've got agreements with them, we then share some of that value back with them. Because unless we do that, we're not going to get the buy-in from the customer. So the opportunity is huge. I think at the bigger end of town, you're seeing that happen at scale. I mean, the bigger end, the commercial, industrial customers, they are trying to decarbonise as quickly as anyone. So the bigger players are out there are always coming to players like ourselves, wanting to help decarbonise their own businesses. It's challenging. But there's huge opportunities as well, whether, as you said, it's rooftop solar or whether it's, we've got some customers out there where, they've been diesel operated, they're off the grid. You get in there with them working to decarbonise, putting solar and batteries in. You can do amazing things with these customers and then, sharing that value back into the grid as well. So I think there is huge opportunities because I think it shouldn't just be the energy markets that's doing the heavy lifting here. It's got to be the whole sectors in the market doing this with us.
Time for the audience to participate again. We've been talking about the challenges. We've got more to cover off shortly, but whichever way you look at it, we need to accelerate the deployment of renewables in Australia. And the question we're putting to you is, what are the most important factors that will help accelerate renewable energy projects in Australia? You've got 3 choices, so select your top 3. We'll give people a bit of time to complete that, and then we'll see what we come up with. But I really want to pick up on, maybe to cut to the chase, we've spoken already about the importance of bipartisanship. I think there were polite ways of saying there's some concern and anxiety about the coalition's current energy policy. I'm going to get to in a second reflections on nuclear power and both its role in the energy mix and, of course, what to be frank, a distracting debate about nuclear power means for investors here and now. Who wants to weigh in on this one? Firstly, there's a lot of uncertainty about the coalition's current energy policy. We'll actually hear from Ted O'Brien, the Shadow Energy Minister, tomorrow morning. He's providing a keynote presentations, but really invite some reflections on where we are now and then that issue around nuclear power.
Maybe I'll kick this one off. I think we've been pretty clear in our position on nuclear. I came out in March to say, nuclear is not part of our strategy. We need to decarbonise our own portfolio. Our coal will close by no later than 2035, so we haven't got time to wait for nuclear to be there. We need to build 12 gigawatts of both firming and renewables over that period of time. So we have to get on with it, and that's going to be a combination of those renewables and capacity assets. And such as batteries and then gas will play as part of the mix too. So we've been very clear in our position on this one that we can't see what we need for our customers over the next 10 to 12 years as coal closes. We need to get on with it because you heard today Daniel says, well, coal will get to the end of its life. We saw that with Liddell, the Liddell power station right at the end when we closed it last year or so. It was running at about 50% capacity. So we do need to get on with replacing the assets that are in this market for sure.
I think another question to ask is, why is this debate coming up? And is it so much about nuclear or is it again about the trust and the social licence in communities? And I think the reason it's coming up so strongly and it's been latched onto and is creating another energy policy war, is that people are really frightened about the proliferation of large-scale solar and wind and transmission across their backyards, whether that's for higher agricultural purposes, because our landscape is beautiful and we want to see it stay that way for whatever reason. And what they're really saying is, if you can make the most you possibly can of brownfield sites where the connections already exist and the transmission already exists, can we do something better there? And I guess I'd love to have a more fulsome discussion about what you can do better with the existing connections and sites that are already very disturbed. And it's when we get into, our pristine environment and, I guess we see the Greens coming out in support of things that we never thought they would, because they're so worried about biodiversity. These things are worth worrying about. But some of the answers maybe are in what do you do a lot more in the sites that we've already got? And I think that could be, probably more insightful than do we build nuclear when we haven't got time for it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Stephanie, to that point, building out the transmission system, number one, improvements in grid connection processes, number three. So I think consistent with that theme. Rob, Squadron building a nuclear power station in Australia in the next 20 years?
No. Simple answer. Look, I think we all ought to, as we go through this energy transition, keep an open mind to what new technologies could bring. But the simple reality, if you look at what's been proposed, first nuclear power station in 2037, I think is what's been proposed. I think we all know that even if that were to be the case, if we headed down that path, it's not going to happen at the date. These things always take longer and cost more. But just for a thought experiment for a minute, and let's assume that one was available in 2037. Well, coal will be coming out between now and 2035. So that actually doesn't solve the problem. We've got to get on with the job of building and rebuilding our energy system, and we're going to do that with the technologies that we've got available to us, which we know, and we've heard Daniel Westerman speak this morning, that the cheapest and fastest way to do that is with renewables backed up with firming. I think the last point I just want to make is the skeptic in me says that this whole debate is it really all about just kicking the can down the road for as long as possible so that coal can stay there as long as possible? And I think the moment we see the fossil fuel lobby groups supporting nuclear, then I think we'll see what the true motive is behind all of this.
I might just add to that. So I think with regards to the nuclear debate, I think the viability of new nuclear is very jurisdictional. So if we were living perhaps in South Korea or certain parts of Europe, new nuclear might be a viable additional part of the decarbonisation equation. But in this country, I think it's much more instructive for us to look at countries that have had big gaps in their nuclear reactor development program, and so that's the UK and the US. The last two large-scale nuclear reactors to be built have been, first of all, extensions of existing brownfield assets, but secondly, they have taken 10 to 15 years to build. So if we're starting from scratch, it's going to take longer than that. So to Damien and Rob's point, we do not have time for that. The second key data point is if you look at both of those, they call them car key developments in the infrastructure land, the cost per megawatt equates to 30 million Australian dollars per megawatt, which is hugely more expensive than Snowy Hydro 2 and almost 10 times the factor of wind. And the third key thing that's missed a lot on the broad Australian public is that in Australia today we have a single nuclear reactor, it's 20 megawatts, it's at Lucas Heights. There's probably 5 people in this country who know how to operate one of these things. So we're talking about building a whole new industry to address a decarbonisation issue that everyone keeps saying we're not moving quickly enough. So I think just time and practicality is against the viability of it in this country.
Yeah, I don't think anyone here would disagree with that. I think the really interesting question is what is this debate, what is the prospects of a future government deciding to slow down renewables and push ahead with nuclear with all of the context you just provided. What does that mean for us here and now? If you're trying to get a renewable project financed in the next month or year, how does all of that debate, the lack of bipartisanship on energy policy, the prospects that there could be a pretty dramatic change in policy. What effect is that having now and in coming months?
Well, it's definitely got an adverse effect. I think the issue is, to what degree is it adverse? I think being logical, it's highly unlikely that a nuclear strategy for decarbonisation in Australia will roll out. The other side of the coin is I think the strategy is for 6 gigawatts of nuclear, which is not adequate to meet the new build that we need. So we still need a lot of renewables anyway. But back to the point that I think each of us have made in various forms, the more we can get policy certainty and a level of unity. Rob made the point that they're not having these debates in offshore jurisdictions, and that's why they are going ahead at a significantly greater rate than Australia is really important.
Interestingly, when we look at the poll questions, the build-out of transmission really rates quite clearly as I guess, opportunity and focus area number one. Would anyone like to comment on? I mean, we know building transmission is hard and complex. We've probably touched on some of the social licence challenges and environmental and community challenges that renewables have, let alone are there and relate to transmission as well. What's the panel's thoughts and reflections on that? Are we doing the right, we've got Rewiring the Nation, we've got governments, I think it's fair to say, leaning in to the transmission build. Right now, I wish we'd have invited, in fact, I think we did invite Brett Redmond to be on the panel to provide his perspective on this topic. But what's your assessment of the transmission build out? How do we speed it up is probably the question.
I can go first. No one else wants to. Look, I think there's pockets where it's actually, going ahead reasonably well. So if I look at Electranet and Powerlink, they've got really clear plans. So the government has clearly, in both of those states, come out and said, it's going to be here, it's for these reasons, we're going to connect up these mines or these industrial centres, and this is its purpose, and off we go. And in both of those examples, they've had a pretty good run at it from a trust-building perspective with local communities. In Powerlink's example in particular, that copper string project's been going for over a decade. And so if you sort of delve into the trust aspect of it, they've been building trust with those local communities for a long time, but they've gone ahead pretty well. In Western Australia, we've got allocated to us, I think it's about $3 billion of the Rewiring the Nation allocation. And it's notionally for that large-scale transmission build-up and preferably, I think, for the Pilbara, though I think they're still reserving the right for that to also operate in the Swiss. But again, I would say the settings that have worked very well, particularly in Queensland, is where the state government has very clearly said, it's going here, it's for this purpose, and then it allows everybody to then make investment decisions based upon the timeframes that have been given and the pathway and the locations that have been set. In WA, we've got a little bit more catching up to do. We've got, certainly the modelling exercise has been done, but like I said, it's not necessarily with a view to connecting a RES, for example, or something like that, or in South Australia to build an interconnect. So our job is to make it really clear for the investment community that it's going here, this is the priority, this is the order, and it's for this renewable zone. For example, if it was the Australian Renewable Energy Hub, that's the most near-term at gigawatt scale green energy that can come into the Port Hedland end. So I think it's all about clarity. If you give absolute clarity that this is where it's needed, it's here, not here, it's for this purpose, then you can get on and do it, and that's where the success has been evidence on an evidence basis delivered in Australia.
Okay, now, if I could just jump in there, I think just building on what Stephanie's been saying, the clarity, and I think a good example of this coming together, albeit it's difficult and it's taken longer than anybody would have hoped, is the Central West Orina RES here in New South Wales, with good planning, recognising well in advance that the sort of piecemeal by piecemeal trying to patch in renewables into the existing grid doesn't work. You actually have to start afresh and design something that's specific, work with community, do all that planning up front, and let's be honest, it's not perfect, but it's a lot. By providing that clarity, that foresight, that planning, we've come a long way. And there's going to be 6 gigawatts of generation being put into that grid. So that's a good example, I think, where instead of just trying to patch up or the process that we followed in the past, it's really looking ahead and planning. That said, the next one or next cab off the rank is planned to be the New England res, and I think that one is going to be more challenging. I think that I'm not saying anything that nobody wouldn't agree with, and I can't help but think that there's perhaps more opportunity to look at expanding the capacity in the Southwest res. There's enormous amount of resource and projects. It's well oversubscribed. There's some planning that could happen if we started now, and building on that a little bit further is Western New South Wales is an amazing resource out there. There's fewer landowners. That's not to say that you don't have to do all the work up front and build community support, but if you compare that opportunity with New England, you can't help but think that we're looking in the wrong place. Probably one last point I would throw out is to build the social licence with community for transmission is a lot to do with that deep listening which I spoke about earlier, and getting in up front and working with community. But it also comes to a fair payment and compensation system, and whilst we obviously need to do that in a way, or the industry needs to do that in a way which is affordable, I can't help but think that the federal government can play a role, but by potentially making those payments part concessional and just making it a much more attractive proposition for those that are hosting transmission.
I echo Stephanie said that Queensland is, I think, definitely is the winner in the recent couple of years of race. This clarity Queensland government giving to the market participant in terms of where the line is going to go and which project going to be connected, and provided that certainty to the developers, investors, where they're going to put their effort to. So I agree that Southwest Res New South Wales is possibly the next big area, which very similar. Got a PAC, we got a Vina Invest, and there's good quality projects currently being developed around the line. And once these projects are built, it could be a pretty big investment hub in the region to support both New South Wales, South Australia, and also Victoria. So we're really looking forward to it.
And while it creates a level of uncertainty in the here and now, there's an enormous amount of reform going on at the moment, whether that's around res design, around the access regimes, around planning, environment, all of these things. Again, the process of reform creates some uncertainty, and in reality, the reform should have happened a decade ago, but there is an enormous amount of reform underway, and so I'm hopeful and expecting over the sort of months and as this year rolls on that we'll see. Rob and I were with the New South Wales Energy Minister quite recently talking about the reforms to planning in New South Wales, which we know has been a major challenge, but there is a lot of momentum, and we hope that that'll flow through. And I think, to your point, Stephanie, I think that plays a role and contributes to some of the challenges for communities to understand what will this mean, what their expectations are, how does industry interact with some of those regimes. It's also a pointer to say all of those topics have got dedicated sessions throughout the course of the next day and a half.
I was just going to add on the back of that, I think the way we think about it, we think about our portfolio of assets we need to build. So we're building out those options so that you can execute on them when either the transmission is there or the opportunity is there as well. So I think it's also important to have a big portfolio around you to do that, because we all know some things will come off, some things might not come off. And also, to I think Steph's point or was Andrew's point, using the infrastructure that's there today. So for us, it's about how do we use the infrastructure that we have. We're building a battery at the Liddell Power Station. How do we use some of that infrastructure so if there are delays in other spots, you can actually get after it as quickly as you can. So I think that's an area around planning and coordination I'd like to see, whereby almost a bit of a separation between where do we know the infrastructure is there today, let's get on with that planning and do the social licence we need to do, versus if transmission is taking longer, you split those two out so you don't end up in one big bucket of planning. You can separate that out and get on with it quicker.
As I said, I think grid connection came in at number 3. I think we heard this morning Daniel and others reflect on, I think we've made really good progress on grid connection, but there's still more work to do. Does the panel have views on where we're up to on grid connection, what else needs to be done. That's a slightly loaded comment because the Clean Energy Council is doing a lot of work through the Connection Reform Initiative on this issue. But
there's a great opportunity for AI in grid connection. So look, when I think about our business is quite different to over here, I guess, but when I look at the team of planners and the model exercise that is done every time we think about connecting something into the various grids, and ours are microgrids as well as, you know, the big transmission in the Pilbara, there's a huge amount of time that is taken up in just understanding what needs to be connected and what impact it has on the rest of the system. And I think that's ripe for AI in order to be able to speed up that thinking time that's currently done probably in a more laborious way than it might need to be. So there's, I guess, a big plug for let's have a go at AI to see if we can get some of that thinking done a little bit quicker and then hopefully streamline the process from there.
Ning, cost-effective and resilient supply chain, fairly well down the list. Does that imply that the anxiety that people had and the price pressures around the supply chain that were evident, back in both COVID and then the Russian war in the Ukraine, have we moved on from those? And I mean, Godwin's a global manufacturer of turbines. Is that supply chain a lot more stable, and is there cause for more confidence about that in the Australian market?
Yeah, I guess from the technology point of view, so the turbines we supply to the customers globally, they all quite big compared to a few years ago. Before COVID, we constructing projects in around the 3 megawatts plus platform, but now most of the projects in development pipeline, they're all 7 plus. So last year, Goldwind supplied over 16 gig turbines actually installed in 2023. So we don't think supply chain globally is a common issue. But here in Australia, pre-COVID and post-COVID, there's quite big difference in terms of our local supply chain. So we got a pretty high construction cost. We got a pretty high cost to get a project built. So not just the equipment from turbine supplier, you also need towers, logistics company to cooperate with. You still need a very big crane to get those turbines built. So the hub height in the market is around 130, 150 meters. So it's reaching high and high. So we need a really big crane to deliver the work. And we're talking about 6 gigawatts per annum for wind installation to meet the target requirements. So 6 gigawatts is, if 6 megawatts per turbine, you need 1,000 turbines built every year to meet the target. That's a lot. It's going to be quite a stretch to some of the local systems in terms of whether the road going to be able to support those big equipment traffic need. So the length of the blades, 175, 180 meters. That's probably the common model in the market right now. So that's probably 90 meters length in a single blade. That's a pretty big piece of equipment to be traveled on roads. So those are the things we really needed to be prepared for the next wave of renewables in the market.
I think that, the local supply chain, I think this can go both ways, but the pressure it puts on roads, on housing, on, other sectors in local communities is real and something we need to be really conscious of. But equally, I think in building our social licence, sharing those benefits, building strong local economic opportunities, I think is an extraordinary opportunity. And I think as an industry, we can do better to coordinate that and leverage the activity of a whole range of projects in a region. And I think that's where the RES planning and execution, I think, becomes important. We're starting to run towards time. I wanted to pick up on the question of gas. Daniel made, I think, some pretty clear comments that he saw gas as really important to complement storage, a lot more renewables, the transmission and network build out. Interested in the panel's views about gas. I mean, it's obviously, we've made reference to, it's had a difficult time from a social licence perspective. Clearly from an emissions perspective, there's a challenge there. But how do you see, maybe as investors and developers, how do you see the case for building more gas, and how do we make sure that's green hydrogen, low emissions, zero emissions, either right now or capable in due course?
I'm happy to jump in there first. Look, as a clean energy industry, I think we need to be viewing gas as a transition to enable more clean energy to come in while we've got our coal coming out of our system. It's simple as that. We've heard Daniel this morning saying renewables coming in needs to be firmed. I won't sort of repeat his comments, but ultimately your options are hydro, batteries and gas. When you have those long periods like we just had in the month of June, and I know all about that because we've got wind farms in Victoria that sort of hit the lowest performance we've seen in many, many years, you've got to have other forms of energy stepping in, and gas plays that role. So, I think the fact that gas has been demonised for a while, I think there's been an awakening to realise that we can't actually get to the outcome that we need to without that. But any new gas, and if you look at the ISP, there's actually, I think, 16 gigawatts of gas that has to be built. So we actually need to get on with that job of getting comfortable that that's going to be part of the solution. It actually is complementary, and it can help us achieve the outcomes we want to achieve from a clean energy industry. But I think any new equipment that gets installed certainly needs to be done so and designed in a way that it can take today a blend of natural gas and hydrogen, and over time a more pure blend of hydrogen once those economics become more plausible. And so just one last point I'd make is that we can say all of that, but we actually have to have available gas supply in the right places. And right now we're seeing a structural shortage emerge down in the southern states, Victoria in particular, and there's really no way that can be solved in the near term. Well, there's three ways you can solve that. You can develop more gas resources in Victoria, which I don't see happening anytime soon. You've got to truck it all the way from Queensland, or you can leverage the benefit of import terminals, of which Squadron's supporting the one at Port Kembla. So I think we really just need to embrace gas as a near-term way to accelerate renewables into our system.
And I'd just add, from an investor perspective, it's definitely been a hotly debated topic about what's the viability of gas as an asset class for institutional investors to invest in. I think as an industry, it's really important that we're very clear that it's a critical enabler, because what's different about gas is that it provides seasonal firming, which is difficult to get from almost every other form of technology that we're looking at. But also the volume that is adopted needs to be proportional to what's required, not overbuilding for the system. And finally, I'd just say that there's some pretty clear guidelines internationally around the science-based emission targets and how you can ensure that you're building new GPG that's actually fitted in advance to convert to cleaner fuels like biofuel or green hydrogen. So I think it is a really important debate, and I think for energy security, it's quite clear from the ISP and a lot of clever people in this industry that you talk to that for seasonal firming, gas has an important role, but there's still further education to be done with the institutional investor community.
I think there's clear evidence in the month of June just how important gas was. It stepped in and kept the lights on.
I'd agree, yeah.
And look, maybe just add, if I look in South Australia, which, we heard this morning, it sits up around, 70, 80, 90% renewables. We've got a gas peaker down there. It's on and off in 5 minutes. It might run, 5 to 10% of the year. We've got a battery that operates in milliseconds. So again, what this market needs is this flexibility, but ability to respond when things aren't, when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining. And that asset for us has done exactly what we anticipated it to do. So I think there is absolutely a role for as a transitional fuel through this time, because it will support, therefore, the development of renewables, but back with the likes of hydro as well. I think that will also play a role in this market too.
Again, there'll be sessions throughout the course of the next day and a half, both on, I think, the role of those long-duration energy storage solutions, of batteries, of hydro, and how they're evolving. Certainly from our perspective, accelerating those solutions is absolutely critical, so that we can, gas, the role that it does play, continues to phase down as those technologies and solutions get deployed. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to finish on something that's, I think, actually critical to everything that we discuss. It's actually much more personal. But it's actually, I think, one of the biggest challenges and priorities for our industry, and that's really about how do we manage ourselves, our well-being, and that of our teams. All the things that we just discussed then throughout the course of the last hour and a half they're really complex, they're challenging, they're stressful, they're intense. We're doing this because there is a greater purpose to it. I think all of those things do create pressure, intensity, burnout, you name it, for people working in this sector. And really my closing question to the panel is really a more personal one, to invite you to reflect on what are the things that either you personally are doing at the moment or you're doing with your teams to help support them and their emotional, mental health, their well-being in confronting these challenges both now, and let's face it, these challenges aren't going away. Hopefully some of them will pretty quickly, but this energy transition is going to take place over the next decade, and we need to make sure we're looking after ourselves and our people to deliver it. So I'm going to share some wisdom, what's working for you or for your teams. What are you seeing that I think is helpful for you or your teams at the moment?
Look, I'll kick it off. I mean, I think individually, for myself, it's about actually taking that time. Make sure you do take a break, do decompress. It is a long journey that we're all on. This is, one of the most complex transitions this country has seen. So for us, one of the things we've implemented at AGL, we call it recharge leave. You take your 4 weeks and you'll get an additional week leave on top of that. We recognise just the sheer amount of complexity our people are now dealing with, not just in the operational assets, but thinking differently. How do we transition our customer? How do we transition our portfolio? This is also, though, I think the way to think about it is bloody exciting. It's a really exciting opportunity for our people. And also exciting from a perspective is we can reshape the workforces for the future as well. I think when we think about diversity and inclusion, in a very male-dominated industry that we're in, certainly at AGL, there's also a huge opportunity to reshape that through this process as well. So I think it's an exciting time, but you're right, recognise that people need to take time.
Just picking up off the back of Damien, at Squadron we've got something quite similar, and we call it wellbeing leave, but the same principle, that recognising that we're really trying to encourage people. You're working hard, yes, you've got a lot of passion for what you do, and there's the connection to purpose, but we're all working very hard. You need to take time out, and so there's a reward for actually taking time out, which is additional wellbeing leave, much like what you described. I think personally, before I move on to personal, some of the other things that we do, for example, we encourage people to exercise, keep fit, so we're sponsor groups to run. For example, we could a team running the City to Surf. I'll be doing that with the team. Because we're out in regional New South Wales, we sponsor the Dubbo Stampede, which is a running festival.
Sounds dangerous.
It is dangerous. You end up running with the rhinos, I'm told. So I'm joining a team from Squadron, and we participating in multiple events and that. So there's those sorts of things which, I think there was some discussion just before morning tea about you've got to be in cycling to be in this industry. Well, I think you've got to be doing something that it keeps you fit and fresh, and helps sort of decompress and de-stress, but keeps you really focused.
Anyone else, Stephanie?
All of the above. I guess I'll go for a personal one then. Look, I think it's really important to sort of work out what makes you happy, and it's not necessarily chasing, the next big role. It's not necessarily, moving to Sydney and, running, one of these sort of companies. Sometimes it's actually your own work-life balance and the things that you value in your own world. And I know for me, I really value nature. So I spend a lot of my downtime doing trail running. And maybe there's a theme, isn't there, about running or... I gave away cycling because I really valued being able to keep walking and not getting thrown off bikes and losing teeth or
cut it out.
Collarbones and stuff. But I absolutely love being in nature, and I find that it's a great decompressor. That it is an intense industry. It's always on. You've got to find ways, I think, to switch off, actually, and get into a space that makes you maybe look around and go, actually, this is what we're sort of doing this for, because we'd like more of this nature business. And a way to spend more time in it.
Yeah, it's sometimes easy to lose perspective, isn't it? I think connecting with nature or exercising, I think there's sort of things that help you regain Ning or Angela?
Well, I'll just add to that because I was thinking, how do we make this a bit more interesting, the answer to this question? So about a decade ago, I've got some Scandinavian friends. I will butcher the word, but the Scandinavians have a word for this because my recharge is nature. I get out in nature a lot. It's called friluftsliv, which is to immerse yourself in nature and get energy back. So there is a term and it's well known. And I think it's a really important point. Find out what's the thing that recharges you, because for everyone it's different. For some people it's burying yourself in a novel, for other people it's getting out in nature. But then as a team, a lot of very common themes. I think having a real break and actually switching off is critical, so ensuring you enforce that with your team. But also too, I think it's important as an industry in your teams or in your broader organisations that we celebrate the successes, because there's a lot to be done, and I think we can all always feel that there's so much more to do. How are we going to achieve it all? But we have achieved a lot and it's important to celebrate the successes.
Yeah, I just want to recall, in the beginning of this session, there are 42% of people in this room don't believe Australian can be a clean superpower. So the reason, in demand, the challenges we discussed in the last hour or so. I think as part of the industry, we need to be capable to manage the stress we're dealing with every day. And to be able to do that, we need to have more balanced life. So I often say our guys are quite stressed, quite burdened on some of those issues. So we do encourage them to take time off. And we will have our culture tour. We send people to overseas. And you probably don't know that we got a 7.3 Australian champion in our team as well. So we do encourage people to do more sports. Yeah.
I'm going to share a bit more on this at the breakfast tomorrow morning. For the first time ever for a Clean Energy Summit, we've got a breakfast tomorrow morning on exactly this topic, well-being and mental health. Encourage people, in fact I think it's already booked out, but look forward to seeing people who pre-ordered their tickets at that one. Chaired by Anna Collier, and with a great panel to share some of their personal and team reflections. Maybe I could talk to this topic for some time. I do a whole lot of things to manage my own well-being, from working a 9-day fortnight to cycling, which is much as about a physical activity as it is connecting with friends and the social side of it. But actually the point I wanted to make is I actually find just having a conversation like this, an intimate conversation with the 6 of us and 1,500 of our closest friends, I actually find both personally and I think for my colleagues actually is something that I think is quite powerful, and I think it's a part of the journey that we're on as an industry. So that's my way of saying whether you like it or not, you're going to hear us talking more about this topic in the future. That brings us to the end of time. My co-panellists were sceptical that we were going to be able to fill an hour and a half, I might say, at the start. I said, not a chance. We've got a lot to get through. There's a bunch of questions here we didn't get through, but what a rich conversation. I think maybe picking up on that theme, and sometimes easy in these discussions to dwell on the challenges, and in part that's what this event is about, of sharing understanding of those challenges and talking through how we might solve them. But they're also about celebrating the progress and the success. We've had enormous progress and success of an industry. We've doubled the amount of renewables over the last 5 years, and I think each of you have played a role in that, so congratulations and thank you. Thank you for sharing the last hour and a half with us. I think we created a few headlines, didn't we, on the way through, and I think we even laughed a few times on the way through, which is pretty important. So can you all please join me in thanking our panel this morning?